Hello everyone and welcome back to the Garage Clinic. My name is Rusty. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about chassis bracing, specifically on the second generation F-Body. Clearly I've got a Trans Am. Of course the Camaro is the same car. You know, when these cars were built back in the 60s, you know, the General Motors wanted to make the best car they could, but they also had to make it for the least amount of money as possible. I was reading the book The Fabulous Firebird, and in that they were describing the kind of choices that the engineers had to make back then. The engineers really wanted to brace the subframe from the top of the control arm up to the base of the cowl, but the powers that be said it was too expensive to build that in, so that's how we got the hardened wheel well housings that bolted to the fenders, bolted to the front of the car. So, you know, that worked well enough for the masses of cars that they built, but in the ensuing years we've turned these cars into hot rods and drag cars and everything else, and we've added power and performance to them, and unfortunately that makes the car a little bit soft. Let's talk a little bit about the chassis of this second generation F-Body for a second. If you could look under the bottom of this real quick, the way the cars are built, the rear subframe, or the rear frame of the car is built into the unibody. Underneath the front of the car we have a subframe that's bolted to the front of the car, and it goes from about here forward and holds the engine and the front suspension. Really common. The first thing we do to these cars to make them feel and drive better is to put subframe connectors on them. Those run from the back of the bolt-on subframe to where the rear subframe is attached in the unibody. And if you put a connector there on either side, it sort of completes the frame of the car so that the car doesn't bend in the middle. So we've stiffened up the bending already in the middle. So what's the next step to make this car feel better? Well, what we're trying to do is keep the front of that car from moving up, so that if that doesn't move, then what absorbs the flex and what absorbs the shock is the suspension, the springs, the shock absorbers, the control arms, the things that are designed to do that. If the components that are designed to do it work like they're supposed to, that gives you a better handling and a better feeling car. Or specifically what I want to talk about today is the Pro G-Brace from ProTouring FBody. Dave and the guys up there have developed a really nice unit that bolts to the front bolt on the upper control arm, reaches back to the cowl area, and to where the rear of the front fender is bolted to the cowl area. This piece is fantastic in the fact that it's got the adjustments in the middle of each bar here. These things are very robust. You're not going to worry about bending these unless you hit something really hard. But what it does is it triangulates that whole assembly so that it makes the vehicle much more rigid. These cars are a little bit like old shoes, especially now that they're 40 and 50 years old. But the front of the car, when you hit a sharp bump, has a tendency for the nose of the car to bounce up. You don't feel it because everything happens so quickly, but what happens is the subframe bolts to the bottom of the unit body. All that acts sort of like a pre-spring. That shocks, that moves, and then your springs and control arms and sway bars and everything come into effect and start taking over after that. Well, when building a modern car, they've got these chassis so stiff now you don't really see these kind of things, but back then that would happen before your suspension would begin to work. So what we've been doing for years in trying to improve these cars is get the suspension to control the vehicle. So if we can take that extra movement of the body out of the equation, like I said, our springs and control arms are the one controlling things, then our car is going to feel a whole lot different. Very excited about that. I kind of looked up online to see how the conversations were going about this, and these things have been out for years. This isn't really anything new, but I haven't seen anybody really discuss it, certainly not in a video format. Lots of online forums, people asking questions, is this worth doing? What I did find was that those people that are respected, those people that are well known in especially the F-Body world out there, whether they're competing their cars or not, every one of them said this was one of the most effective things that they had done to their car, especially for the feedback and the feel of the way the car drives. So the steering response is quicker, you don't get as many rattles, and the car has not got extra movement that's unnecessary. According to what I have seen and what I've read, this is supposed to stiffen the front of the car up to 30%, which is the number that they're claiming, which means that we actually could get more than that. Now, one of the advantages to this particular bar is that, you know, back in the day, the fit and finish and the tolerances on the cars weren't magnificent. So these cars have a tendency to move, especially over 40 or 50 years. So the cars are not exactly where they were when the General built them back in the day. So these bars being adjustable gives you the ability to fit that bar to your car. You'll be able to see where that bolt goes over the front control arm is actually a bolt hole. There's no slot there. There's no wiggle room. That's going to be a firm fit. This the bolt that goes to the rear of the front fender is slotted, but this is adjustable, so you will have a solid fit there. And then the only two places really you have to drill is at the top of the cowl where the sheet metal is all pinched together. But this is one of the easiest installations of anything I've done on the car so far. So anybody can do this. The hard part's getting the hood off because it takes two people to do. I'll show you a step-by-step install on one side. I've already got one done, so I kind of cheated a little bit, but I'll show you how to put that on, and you can certainly do this. I thought about trying to do this without removing the hood, but that just would not be worth it. Not with the drilling that needs to happen. Removing the hood is easy. Just remove the 4 bolts. You're going to need another set of hands. Then find a safe place to store the hood. Clearly I put it on top of my car. There are only 2 bolts that hold each hood hinge on. Easily removed, but you're going to need that space to work on the rear fender bolt, so you might as well go ahead and remove those as well. Having the weight of the car on the lower control arm is fine, but you do not need the weight of the car on the wheel. It'll try to push the upper control arm in, and you don't want that when you're removing that front bolt. So I just jacked up the front a little bit so that you can see that I took the weight off that wheel. Here's where we remove the front bolt on the upper control arm. You got to take it completely off so that you can slide the front of the G-brace over the bolt and then snug the nut back down. You don't want to tighten it because you'll need to swing that brace back and forth while you're working on it, but you don't want any play there. Here's the reason you don't want the hood hinges on. This is the rear fender bolt for the front fender. You have to remove that, and you just need the space to work there. This is where the short arm of the G-brace is going to be bolted to. The kit came with plenty of washers for loads of adjustability. I elected not to use them, and I had no troubles fitting it to my car. The center nut is the adjuster, so here I am lengthening that part of the brace, and you'll see here in a second what I was just watching this gap in the back and trying to remove that without any tension on the brace. Now we're going to mark the spots on the cowl where we're going to drill for the bolts to go through. You may have to rotate that bar a little bit to make sure the round part of the bar is not hitting the bottom of the cowl. That would make it not sit flat. That's an easy adjustment to make. You are going to want to start off with a smaller drill bit. One of the stepped drill bits really makes this a lot easier, but I didn't want to finish with that because I wanted a very specific size. I ended up finishing this hole with a 23/64 drill bit, which is a bizarre kind of size for something like this, but it was perfect to keep it snug around these bolts, but yet give me just a little bit of room to make them easier to install. So now we're going to turn the center nut on the main bar just enough so that you start to feel some tension, and when you do, you know you got a good preload on it, which is where we want to be. So now that we got the preload where we want it, just hold that center nut with the wrench, and with another wrench we're going to go ahead and tighten up the locking nuts to lock that bar in place so that we don't have any more movement. And now we're going to do the same thing on the smaller bar. So now we're going to reinstall the hinges. We're going to put the hood back on, get it lined up so we don't do any damage to the car, close it, and take it for a test drive. The difference in the car is amazing. This road is loaded with patches and potholes, and the front of this car feels like a modern car. Unfortunately, now I got to find a way to get the back of the car to feel like the front, but no more rattling. The front end doesn't shake when you hit bumps and potholes and stuff. This has just been magnificent. I haven't even tested the handling yet. Well, if you have any questions or comments, please post them under the video. If you like what you saw, please like the video. I very much appreciate it. And don't forget to check us out on the Facebook page at The Garage Clinic. And thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time.